Hi everyone, I'm Mara Webster with SAG-AFTRA Foundation, and we are here today continuing with our Conversations at Home series. I also wanted to share details because SAG-AFTRA Foundation is a nonprofit, and we are currently raising funds through a COVID-19 donation for actors who are currently out of work due to all the closed productions as we all stay home and socially distance. Full details of this are in the event description of the YouTube video, so just look right down below. I am so thrilled this afternoon to be joined by Dan Bucatinsky, who is starring in the new ABC show, Baker and the Beauty, which is really fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Dan. And I wanted to just ask how everything has been going with staying at home right now and homeschooling your family.
Yeah, I really, my hat's off to every educator who has taken on the task of educating our kids up until now, because now the job has been thrown in our court, and boy, that is not an area of strength for me. But I've got two kids in different corners of the house on two different schedules. My daughter's in high school and my son's in middle school, and we have been at home. We've been at home. The plus side is we're taking more walks, and I am baking, period. Not just because I'm on the Baker and the Beauty, because I'm neither the Baker nor the Beauty, but I am baking up a storm because I've got the time. And we're playing games, and this is an opportunity for the family, for good and for bad, to get to know each other better. But we are thankfully we are safe, and we are healthy, and we are in it for the long haul, as long as it takes, because it's so important that everybody stay home if we're going to slow this thing down. So I feel at least glad that we're taking part in that.
Absolutely. So glad to hear that it's all going well and you're enjoying the extra time you're getting to spend with your family right now.
Wait, did I say I was enjoying it? I don't think I said that. I think I said that I was doing it. I don't think I said I was enjoying it. No, you know what? You did probably detect that there were moments of enjoyment. I'm sort of teasing. I've been playing one-on-one basketball with my son during every single one of his breaks. And if you know anything about me, I am the least athletic person. I can be on a exercise bike by myself, but playing one-on-one basketball is like my childhood all over again. Only this time, the guy teasing me for my moves is my own son.
And much smaller than you.
No, he's huge. Are you kidding? My 12-year-old son is taller than I am.
Wow.
But all in all, we're doing well.
That's so great. I wanted to jump right into talking about the show, and it's based on one of the highest rated narrative Israeli series that they've ever had over there. And I was wondering if for you, whether you wanted to take the time to look at that show when you were considering signing on, or whether you actually found it better to just keep a distance from it, because obviously they're very different shows. It's just the initial concept.
Correct. Well, when I was offered the Baker and the Beauty, I had the script for the American version. I had not seen the Israeli version. And in the time that it took me when I was considering it, I did watch the pilot of the Israeli version, which got me hooked. And then I wound up watching several others. The story of the pilot is very similar to the one that we did. Only where it takes place and the configuration of the family is different. I also think it's so interesting that they were able to adapt a half-hour single-camera comedy for the Israeli, that was the original version, and turn it into a 1-hour family dramedy. And it's really interesting because in a way, our story is more expanded. Our characters each have their own storylines. And I think there's more room. One of the reasons I wanted to do it was because it felt like there would be time and room to explore a lot more of the areas that are so rich from the pilot. Anybody who watches the Israeli version is hooked in quite quickly, because the pilot takes place in one night. And I always love stories like that. So I was hooked after seeing the original and reading the script, and I love the genre of trying to bring comedy into a character-driven 1-hour family show, which this is.
That's amazing. And given that you were mentioning that the tone is very much that of a dramedy, do you think about the tone and the overall atmosphere of what the show is going to be in terms of your performance? Or again, do you just need to keep that completely separate and really just focus on your character and the scene?
Well, kind of both. I mean, the show is very grounded. It's not broad at all. I mean, it is really funny, and certain characters have been called. Certain characters sort of pop comedically. Um, Everyone sort of has comedic moments in the show, and some characters pop comedically more than others. My character is kind of has a funny, edgy. It kind of reminds me of that Ari character of Jeremy Piven had in Entourage. That was one of the things that appealed to me about it. I like being able to play somebody who has such a kind of a tough, uh, unedited exterior, but is kind of also has a really soft interior, an emotional interior, which is we got to explore in the series. I'm aware of the tone of the show and the pace a bit when performing it, only because it allows you to understand what kind of liberties you can take in performing it. I mean, some scenes are clearly meant to be funny, and some scenes are clearly not meant to be, but the whole show has a kind of grounded feel to it, which I love. So to answer your question, yeah, we really do have to play every scene for the reality of it. But some of them clearly have been written in a way that allow for the maximum comedy.
That's so amazing. I love it. Is there a different weight in the decision-making process for you when you're considering signing on to a TV project versus theater and film? Just because theater and film exists in a very finite amount of time, but with something like this, it could be a short period of time that you're involved in. It could be just a pilot. It could be half a season, a full season, or it could end up being several years of your life.
Yes. I mean, you always have to ask yourself, can you live with doing this for the next 10 years? Because it's, the odds are certainly like that won't happen, because it really is lightning in a bottle when you have these shows that have that kind of longevity. But you have to ask yourself that, because otherwise you're sort of playing Russian roulette. You don't really want to be a part of something where the people involved or the writing or the role isn't something that you want to live with for a long time. David Frankel was the director of the pilot of this, and I was a fan of his. We had a conversation about the show and about my role and about sort of, where it could or might go in the future. So I took it seriously. You have to sort of imagine yourself living in this space for a long time. When you sign on to do a TV show, they kind of own you for a long time, or potentially. So yes, I definitely think about, can I live with, is this something that I'm going to enjoy doing for a long time? Should it last? And so that has to be part of the decision making.
Yeah. When you got the season pickup after originally doing just the pilot and got more scripts, were there certain things that you then discovered about your character that you maybe hadn't picked up or gotten as a note from David Frankel at that point?
Let me think. Well, I talked to David because he directed the pilot before we shot the pilot. Then after shooting the pilot, you know what? After the table read of the pilot, even before we got the pickup, Dean Georgeris, who created the series, had us all around a lunch table, and it was interesting. He went to every single one of us and sort of spoke very, very preliminarily. I mean, very early days. We hadn't even gotten picked up yet. But he was talking about what he would like to see happen with that character in the season. And it was kind of exciting to hear that, what was thought about for every character. And not just that, how much every character in this ensemble, had so much potential for story in it. So that was very encouraging. So we had already had that in our brains. When we got a pickup for the season, then each of us, I think, went and met with the writers just to get a sense, or maybe to pitch out some things that we had experienced or knew about. I played a manager of Noah Hamilton, who is the beauty and the star in this show, but who's also a bit of a father figure. And I certainly am a father of a daughter, so I had that. I sort of had that experience already. But sort of this this unedited, ruthless, barracuda, protective kind of stage mom, kind of like a momager, like what I can imagine Lindsay Lohan's mom was like, or any mother of a child star. There is a bit of that quality to this character, which I kind of loved. And we talked a lot about how to play someone like that. And he's also a gay man in his late 40s. And what is that like nowadays, who's not, I mean, I am married and I have kids and I've been in a relationship for 28 years. This character is not and has not. And it was very interesting to talk about a character who, in the last decade, we've come such a long way in terms of the portrayals of gay characters on television. They partner and they have kids, and it really was a way of showing the world that what a different view of the gay character as was, say, in the 70s and 80s. But going backwards now, to look at a character who had been closeted for a very long time and who threw his entire life into this client, Noah Hamilton, who has spent no time on intimacy or relationships or building a family of his own. I found that kind of interesting in a kind of retro way. So we talked a lot about that. And in talking about it, I think the conversation allowed for them to go forward and write episodes that might touch on all those themes. But, when you're part of an ensemble and the cast is 8, there's 8 of us, there's so many moving parts and so many characters to service that, in a season, you all start to push forward this, you move the train to the end of the season in a way that helps every character get to their particular endpoint. And, some stuff pushes to the next season. But it really was a very fun show to watch the ways in which we each play cogs in the relationship of the baker and the beauty, and how each of us have our own personal obstacles and goals and problems that we have to work through. I didn't envy anybody in that writer's room. It's a very tricky show to write.
It's also, I heard that there's about 90% of the writers are all Latin and a lot of people from Puerto Rico as well. How do you feel like that really helps lend itself to the authenticity of the show? And also kind of similarly to how you were talking about representation of gay characters, just having that representation of just everyday stories and how important that is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have been in writers' rooms before, and I know how much the chemistry of the personal life of the writer, more than what people believe. What gets you in a writer's room is so much more about what you bring to the ensemble of writers, more than, say, a writing sample. And we were so lucky on The Baker and the Beauty to have that many people who are bringing their family, their personal experience, and a Latino background that helped lend authenticity to the story of a Cuban-American family in Miami. All 8 of us cast members are Spanish-speaking Latin actors. My parents are from Argentina. Natalie Kelly's mom is from Peru. Every character was had sort of an immigrant story in their own DNA. So bringing that to the table was amazing. Shooting in Puerto Rico, which, wasn't my favorite thing to do, just to move away from my family to shoot. But if we had to be anywhere, to be shooting Puerto Rico for Miami and to be surrounded by a Latin crew, and to have that many people with that much authenticity in the writer's room, it really lent itself to what we feel like we created, which was a real family, both off camera and on camera. There's a lot of what our true life experience and warmth and passion and the dancing and zest for food and all that in our real lives that we brought into our characters. And it really, when you see the pilot, you can tell. It just leaps off the screen.
Yeah. Didn't Dean do something with all of you where he had everybody go around and talk about their heritage and their family stories?
Yes, when we all got to know each other, we all were speaking a lot about who we were. We also did that at the TCAs. Those of us who were talking to the press, there was a lot of conversation about what was the individual story of each actor on the show and how that could lend itself to some authenticity. Certainly the fact that we all spoke Spanish to our Spanish-speaking crew. That was a very rare thing, I think, when you have an American cast mostly, playing Latin characters. I mean, I wasn't playing a Latin character, but I speak Spanish and I come from that background. It really was, it felt like it was a very unique thing that was happening.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about your relationship on screen with Noah, you were mentioning, because your characters' lives are so intertwined, not just professionally, but as we all know in the entertainment industry, you develop these really, really strong friendships when you're spending every day with people in high stress environments. And I was curious about some of the conversations that the two of you had together and some of the decisions you made about what you thought their backstory and history together would have been, because it plays so well on camera in the show.
Well, Natalie Kelly and I knew that our relationship was going to be a very unique one in the show. This is really a show about two families, one that's big and vital and warm and loud. And there's three siblings in a family with both parents are there and they own a business together and they all live together. And then you have Noah, who doesn't really see her mother and doesn't have a relationship with her father and only has Lewis in her life. And Lewis, who is not partnered and only has this sort of surrogate daughter in his life. And Natalie and I spoke a lot about the feelings that would evoke and how we had to turn to each other to be able to play both the business relationship, because we are running a business and she represents a brand and we have to come off like we are those people, but also the ways in which Lewis has known Noah since she was born and has a kind of protective mother to its cub vibe about him when he's with her. So we talked a lot about that. Natalie and I spent a lot of time together. We became very close. I had a kind of protective feeling about Natalie anyway, and we talked a lot. We fought like father and daughter. We made up like father and daughter. We went, we became very close friends, and we still remain very close friends. And the bond of having that be the primary relationship that each of us are having during the show was a valuable one.
Yeah. I was also interested in how Dean and all the different directors of the show created a really conducive environment in terms of the pre-production process for all of you on each episode to make sure that you had time to really discover your characters in each episode and find the nuances of each of the scenes, and whether that was through a rehearsal process or conversation process, either prior to starting to film or once you were on set for each individual scene.
We didn't have the benefit of, and this is true of a lot of, I was on Scandal for several seasons, and, Scandal was another one where the scripts, we would often be reading the script for the first time at the table read. And with Baker and the Beauty, by the way, which was delightful and exciting and allowed us to experience the script much like the audience was going to be experiencing it, where we would gasp at what was happening, but we would be shooting it literally that afternoon, With Baker and the Beauty, we didn't really have the luxury of table reads. The scripts were coming in pretty close to when we were shooting them. And we were evolving into our characters and learning how to incorporate the new information of each episode very close to when we were shooting it. But very soon, each director that came on board was an asset, and we often socialized. We were socializing anyway in Puerto Rico, because when you're away, you form this family anyway. So oftentimes we would have an opportunity as a group and as actors to talk about our dynamics with each other and to talk about what we were trying to create together when we were out for dinner, and then dancing. We danced all the time. So I have to say that a lot of what was created on screen was happening and evolving, as was our experience living and working in Puerto Rico. And we had, there were a lot of hiccups along the way. There were earthquakes in Puerto Rico and storms and health problems. And being in Puerto Rico was fantastic, but also posed some challenges, which also brought us much closer together as a cast.
Yeah. Given that you were mentioning the speed at which obviously the scripts are coming through in television, do you have a different process for kind of learning and committing that to memory for television? Because also different to film and TV, you can actually forget it and let it go once you've done that particular scene.
Yeah. It's a muscle, like the more you're doing it, the more you're able to do it. And each of us have different process, like some of the cast were able to read the script and absorb the whole script and then really focus on their scenes closer to when they were shooting them so that it didn't feel so by rote. Other people really, really need to learn their words in order for it to get digested so they can come to set and just forget about it. Everyone has their own process. I had been in a play exactly a year ago with an enormous amount of dialogue. It scared the living hell out of me. I hadn't been in a play in 20 years, and this was more dialogue than I'd ever learned in my entire life. And getting through that and learning lines for that felt like preparing for a marathon. And so my muscle memory for learning lines was a little more in tune when I got to Puerto Rico. So I was able to read the whole script. I would work on my scenes to some degree, but then the day before or the day of, I would do a sort of a deep dive into trying to learn what those scenes were so that I was never thinking about it when I got to set. That's always the goal, of course. And it worked pretty well, but each of us had a different process in terms of doing that. And it's different for everything. When you're doing a play, you have to learn it so that it's in your blood. And then every night you're truly living it night by night in the moment live, right? And in a TV show, it's so funny. You kind of trick yourself into doing that a little bit, but it lives in a different part of your brain because so quickly after that scene is over, you couldn't repeat that scene the next day if you tried, because you're on to the next. And it's very interesting how the brain has different sections in it where it hangs on to these things. And there's things that we learned when we were kids and poems and songs that we will never, ever, ever forget. And those live in a different part of the brain. So, but I think sometimes being able to access the words not right before your cue, but really in the moment as a response to what the other actor is doing is such a gift. So whatever you need to do as an actor to get yourself to be able to not be thinking about your dialogue, but have it just almost occur to you in response to pure listening to the other person is so hard. And yet that's the goal. So even if you have to spend hours and hours memorizing so that's what happens when you get on set, you do it.
Yeah. And also, since you're a writer yourself, do you find that you tend to comb through scripts very much in a more analytical way, line by line?
Yeah, it's really hard because I have to put the producer and writer hat away when I am acting, but it's not always easy. And luckily Dean was a very collaborative showrunner. And when there were things that felt like they could be of value, when there was a suggestion for maybe a little pivot in the scene or a different way of saying the same thing, they were always very open to that. And I found that to be very liberating. As a writer, I used to always be very precious about you got to say it the way I wrote it. Cause I spent a lot of time writing that exact script. I don't want you to just say whatever you want. And then you're an actor and you're like, well, wait a minute. I would so much rather say this cause it feels more authentic to me. And you realize that perspective is different. And my appreciation for that kind of openness and flexibility is greater when I'm acting, of course, than when I'm the writer. And I want people to say it the way I heard it in my head. But there was a lot of collaboration on this show, and it was really fun to be able to say, look, I want to just try a joke here and see if it works. And sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't, but they were very open to that.
Yeah. Similarly, I was also interested in whether your own work in directing gave you a different understanding of what you are there to do as an actor and what a director really needs from you in the moment.
Well, look, the only directing I've done was on a show I did with my producing partner, Lisa Kudrow, and my husband, Don Roos, which was called Web Therapy. And it was so specific. The directing that was improvisation on computers, much like this. In fact, this looks exactly like Web Therapy. And the skill set in directing actors who are improvising Yeah, I mean, there was something about the appreciation for allowing that to happen and then trying to encourage our visiting directors to let us do that. But also, I mean, there was a lot of give and take, I think, with the directors and us. My experience as a writer, producer probably weighed more on me than any experience I've had directing. But I had a relationship with several of the that sounds bad. I had a previous professional and or friendship relationship with many of the directors who came to direct The Baker and the Beauty. Joanna Kearns and I are dear, dear friends. David Franklin and I had met obviously before. Melanie Mayron. So I was able to, there was some really fun conversations and very spirited conversations about the creative process that I was able to have with almost all the directors on the show, and certainly the ones that I knew before. So I brought all of that sort of, I think, helped. I also am one of the older members of the cast, and so I think I played a little bit of a camp counselor role, as did Lisa Vidal and Carlos Gomez. The three of us were sort of the parental units on the show. We all sort of were herding our younger cast members when we could.
Are there people that you remember doing that similar kind of maternal herding for you when you were starting out in your career?
That's a really good question. I think so. Yeah. I mean, well, look, I have been lucky enough in a way, or maybe you'd look at it as unlucky enough. I really started working regularly in TV as only an actor, when I was in my 40s. So it was less so. On Scandal, my husband was Jeff Perry, who was a Steppenwolf founder. And Tony Goldwyn. I mean, the people I got to work with on Scandal, to me, were like all of them mentors, even some of the actors who were younger than me. I felt like I had to bring my A game, and I felt like every actor made me better. So I had an openness to my castmates on that show that I think really helped me grow. I think, and I would hope, that the same is true on The Baker and the Beauty. I think it's certainly, in cases where things were happening off camera, many times the cast would come to me to ask me, what does this mean? And what do you think we should do about it? And other times, just in terms of the acting and the etiquette and the way in which we work on set, I think a lot of times the younger, less experienced actors would just absorb from those more experienced.
That's so great. I also think one of the most exciting things about what you get to do is that every single project challenges you in completely new and different ways. And I was curious with this show what those specific challenges were and how it pushed you in new and different ways as an actor.
Oh, wow. That is a really good question. It is true. Like, each show I've been on has forced me to do things that I maybe hadn't done before, in a good way. This one, a lot of it had to do with working in Puerto Rico and being away from my family, and relying on my castmates, both on screen and off, to become my family. A lot of it had to do with that. A lot of it had to do with being a paternal character. I played the dad, one of two dads to Casey Wilson on Marry Me. That was such a comedy. That was such a wild comedy that the challenges of that show had so much more to do with stretching my comedic chops. Playing somebody who's a true father figure to an adult in this way on this show had its own challenges that I thought were really fun and helped me grow. There's also some storyline. There's a storyline for my character, which I cannot tell you, that was challenging for me, and hard, and I hadn't quite done before. And so, yeah, I mean, the story took me in a place that I hadn't experienced before. But more than anything, I think when I was on 24, we shot in Atlanta, and I got to, and CTU, the scenes were done and finished, and I would come back every I came back to LA so often, it didn't quite feel like I was 100% hunkered down in a different city. I think living in Puerto Rico for as long as I did with this cast and relying on them the way one relies on a family was different than any other experience I'd had before. And that in and of itself was challenging. I also think being on a 1 hour, the last 2 1 hours I was on was Scandal and 24, which were serious shows that often had life or death stakes to them, literally. I mean, I've quite experienced life and death on that show, and almost did on 24. This has had its own challenges, which goes back to one of the things you said earlier, which was the whole tone of a 1 hour comedy, a 1 hour light family character-driven comedy, dramedy, has its own challenges because you want the stakes to still be there and you want people's stories to have enough gravity that you buy them without the show being about terrorism and having a bullet put in your back. So, calling on yourself to let the stakes really land when they're not life and death, but they are meaningful to each character, it has challenges in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, I really very genuinely enjoyed watching your performance in the show, and I'm excited to see more episodes as they come out. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and I hope that the homeschooling goes great over the next few weeks.